Before we start, this is the oldest unsolved murder in Los Angeles history. 79 years, no arrest, no conviction, and the person who did it was never even charged.
Because whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing.
That's a theory, Simone, not a fact.
Cut a woman in half at the waist, drain her of blood, leave nothing behind. That's not a theory about the killer. That's a description of him.
The Black Dahlia.
There it is.
January 15th, 1947. A mother walking with her child spots something in a vacant lot in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. At first, she thinks it's a discarded mannequin.
It wasn't. It was Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, cut cleanly in half at the waist. Her body had been completely drained of blood and scrubbed clean before it was left there.
No blood at the scene at all, which tells us the murder didn't happen where she was found. She was killed somewhere else, then posed.
Posed is underselling it. Her face had been cut from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, what investigators called a Glasgow grin. That's not just violence, Eli. That's a signature.
Or it's mutilation designed to prevent identification and delay the investigation. Brutal, yes. Doesn't require a psychological profile to explain.
The precision of the cut at the waist is the part that gets me. Detectives at the time said it looked almost surgical.
Which is exactly why the LAPD served a warrant on the USC Medical School and started pulling records on anyone with anatomical training. It's a real lead, it's just never closed the case.
Before we go further into the investigation, I want to say who she actually was, because the case has buried her under her own nickname.
Elizabeth Short. Born in Boston 1924, the third of 5 daughters. Her father lost the family's savings in the 1929 crash, and the following year his car was found abandoned on a bridge. Everyone assumed he jumped.
He hadn't. He turned up alive years later, living under a new name in California, which is part of why she eventually moved out west herself, to try to reconnect with him.
The Black Dahlia isn't even a name she chose or was known by. Her friends called her Betty. The nickname was invented by newspapers after she was already dead. Some accounts say it came from her dark clothes, others from a film that had just come out called The Blue Dahlia. One paper called it the werewolf murder first.
And the press didn't just name her after death, they invented her. In the same weeks, she was reported as an aspiring actress, a sex worker, promiscuous, a lesbian, and a prude, sometimes in the same paper.
She had no actual film or stage credits. She worked as a waitress. The aspiring actress label is mostly myth, too, just a more flattering one than the others.
Which is the real story underneath all of this, honestly. A 22-year-old nobody agreed on anything about, being turned into whatever story sold papers that week. And it's still happening 79 years later, every time someone tells this case. There's a specific detail in her biography worth sitting with, because it's the reason we even have a face to put with this story. In 1943, 4 years before she died, Short was arrested in Santa Barbara for underage drinking, at a bar in what's still called El Paseo today.
That arrest is the entire reason this case was solvable in the most basic sense. Her fingerprints from that booking, plus a job application she'd filed at Camp Cook near Lompoc that same year, are literally what let the FBI identify her body in 1947. Without a teenager getting arrested for underage drinking 4 years earlier, they may not have identified her at all.
And the mugshot from that same arrest, dark, curly hair, that specific expression, is the actual photograph the press ran everywhere. That's the face everyone pictures when they hear Black Dahlia. It's not a photo from her murder investigation. It's a booking photo from a bar in Santa Barbara, 4 years before anyone knew her name would matter.
The bungalow she was living in at the time is reportedly still standing on West Montecito Street, tucked behind a wall next to a convenience store now.
Which is sort of the whole case in one image, honestly. A regular building still standing on a regular street, and almost nobody who walks past it has any idea what happened to the girl who once lived there. I've actually sat in that bar, Eli. El Paseo's mine. That's home for me. And it hasn't changed much from what I understand. Same courtyard, more or less the same bones it had back then.
I didn't know that.
It's a strange thing, realizing you've probably had a drink 20 feet from where a 19-year-old girl got booked into a life she had no idea was about to end 4 years later. You don't think about it until you know to think about it.
That's the thing about places like that. They don't remember anything. They just keep being a bar.
Yeah, someone has to. 9 days after the body was found, someone mailed a manila envelope to the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside, Short's birth certificate, her social security card, photographs, and an address book with several pages torn out.
The envelope and its contents had been wiped down with gasoline, an attempt to destroy fingerprints, which at least tells us the sender understood forensics well enough to try to defeat them.
Or was smart enough to know what mattered. Over the following weeks, more letters showed up, taunting the police, daring them to catch him.
Which produced over 60 false confessions and roughly 200 interviewed suspects. None of it led anywhere solid. A killer taunting the press doesn't hand you a killer's name.
It hands you a personality. Someone who wanted to be seen, who wanted credit, who was confident enough to mail evidence to a newsroom 9 days after murdering someone in a way that took real time and privacy to carry out.
Worth noting, the newspapers weren't just covering this story, they were competing over it. The Examiner and its rivals were locked in a circulation war, and by several accounts, reporters got to some evidence before police did.
The Examiner literally had detectives on staff, not covering the police, working alongside them, sometimes ahead of them.
Which means some of what we think we know about this case may have passed through a newsroom with a financial incentive to make it more dramatic before it ever reached an official file.
Or it means the paper that received the killer's own mailed evidence had every reason to treat that evidence carefully, because losing it would have ended their exclusive.
Both motives could be true at once. That's sort of the problem with this whole case. Everyone touching it in 1947 had a reason to shape the story rather than just report it.
Doctors, reporters, police, the killer himself, mailing his own evidence to the press instead of destroying it. Everyone in this story wanted to be part of telling it.
Let's talk about George Hodel, since I know you're headed there. A Los Angeles physician. In 1949, 2 years after the murder, he was arrested and tried for allegedly molesting his own 14-year-old daughter. Acquitted, but the allegation was serious enough for a grand jury to hear it.
And decades later, his own son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective, spent years building a case against his father and found an actual LAPD file in the DA's office vault naming George Hodel as the prime suspect in the Short murder.
A file built almost entirely on circumstantial connections and Steve Hodel's own interpretation of his father's character. That's not nothing, but it's not physical evidence tying him to the body either.
There's a wiretapped phone call, Eli. Police had Hodel's home bugged during the original investigation. And on that tape, he's recorded essentially musing that even if he had killed the Black Dahlia, they could never prove it, because the one person who might talk, his secretary, was already dead.
That recording is real. I won't pretend it isn't unsettling.
Neither did the detectives who heard it live.
But they can't prove it from a man under suspicion. Being needled by his own paranoia isn't a confession. People say chilling things about crimes they didn't commit all the time, especially when they know they're being watched.
A physician accused of abusing his own child with the surgical means to make that cut, joking on a wiretap about a secretary who died right when it would have mattered if she talked. That's not one coincidence, Eli. That's a pattern.
Patterns aren't verdicts. He was never charged. He left the country and lived the rest of his life free.
Because nobody could prove it, not because he didn't do it.
Before we close, I want an actual alternative on the table, not just not enough evidence. Because there's a whole other theory that gets far less attention than Hodel, and it's built on its own real research.
Go ahead.
A 2017 book called Black Dahlia, Red Rose makes a case for a bellhop and former mortician's assistant named Leslie Dillon, working with a nightclub owner named Mark Hansen, who Short had actually stayed with in the weeks before her death, and whose address book was one of the items mailed to the newsroom.
Hansen, who, by multiple accounts, had pursued her and been turned down.
Exactly the kind of motive Hodel's theory doesn't even need. The book argues Short was killed at a motel Dillon was staying at, where the owners later admitted finding a room covered in blood the same morning her body was found, and chose to clean it up rather than call the police.
None of those 3 men were ever charged either, though. That's the same evidentiary hole you keep pointing at with Hodel.
It is. My point isn't that this theory is definitely right. My point is that there are at least two well-researched, mutually exclusive theories about who did this, built by different authors decades apart, and they can't both be true. That should lower anyone's confidence in either one, including yours.
Or it should raise it in the one piece every theory keeps landing on independently. That this wasn't a stranger. Whoever did this, in every serious version of this story, knew her. There's one more piece of Steve Hodell's case worth including, because it's bigger than just this one murder.
Go ahead.
Hodell didn't stop at the short case. He spent decades afterward and became convinced his father was responsible for a string of other unsolved murders of women in Los Angeles around the same period. Cases he calls the lone woman murders.
Which is Steve Hodell's own theory, built by Steve Hodell about his own father, using the same kind of pattern matching we've been arguing about all episode. That's worth being honest about.
It's also worth being honest that he's not an amateur making this up from nothing. He spent his entire career as an LAPD homicide detective before he ever started building this case.
A career that also means he knows exactly how to make circumstantial evidence sound like more than it is. Professional experience cuts both ways.
Maybe. But when the person building the case against your father used to be the person whose job was building cases against strangers, I think that earns a little more weight than an amateur theory would.
I'll give you that much. Not the conclusion, just that it's not nothing.
Worth saying plainly, this case is still technically open. LAPD still gets tips.
And still hasn't run the kind of forensic genetic genealogy that actually cracked cases like the boy in the box. Because there's no surviving physical evidence left to test. No DNA, no fibers, nothing preserved from 1947 that modern labs could work with.
Which means unless someone confesses with real, verifiable proof, or a document surfaces that isn't circumstantial, this might be the one case that never gets closed, even by the standards that finally worked on other cases like it.
That's probably true.
Before we close this out, a few details that don't fit anywhere else.
Go.
1. Robert Red Manley, a traveling salesman and the last person confirmed to have seen her alive, was an early suspect. He passed a polygraph test and was cleared, but the tabloids kept dropping his name into stories for years anyway.
Being publicly suspected after being cleared isn't a small thing. That happened to a lot of people in this case.
2. Her body was found roughly 3 blocks from Degnan Boulevard, the same street a young girl named Suzanne Degnan had been murdered on the year before, in a completely different city. Some writers think that's not a coincidence.
It's a coincidence. Los Angeles has thousands of streets. 2 unrelated tragedies sharing a nearby street name in 2 different cities isn't a signature. It's geography.
3. At the height of the investigation, LAPD was fielding so many false confessions that detectives developed a private checklist of details only the real killer would know, specifically to filter out the fakes. Over 60 people confessed to a murder they didn't commit.
Which says something about the case's grip on the public imagination, more than it says anything about who actually did it.
4. And this is the one that actually bothers me. 1947 LAPD was in the middle of one of its most corrupt periods in the department's history. Officers on the take, evidence handled loosely. At least one lead detective on this very case later tied to organized crime connections.
Which is a real problem for trusting the original investigation, I'll give you that. It's not evidence for any specific suspect, though. It's a reason to distrust the whole process equally.
Sometimes that's the most honest thing you can say about a case this old.
Here's my actual case, stripped of everything circumstantial. There is no physical evidence, no blood, no fiber, no fingerprint, that has ever definitively tied any single named suspect to Elizabeth Short's body. Not Hodel, not anyone. Almost 80 years of investigators trying, and the hard evidentiary bar has never been met once.
And my case is that the bar you're using was built for an investigation from 1947. Before DNA, before any of the tools we'd use today. What's left behind, once you look past what physical evidence they didn't have, is a killer who is medically capable, personally cruel enough to abuse his own daughter, arrogant enough to mail proof to a newsroom, and recorded on tape all but admitting it. That's not nothing. That's most of a case.
Most of a case isn't a case.
No, it isn't.